One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
And that was the tune for this morning, because I think all of us need a bit of a nice morning, nice tunes for this morning. It's 8th of November, 2024. We are still here and around, and this is One Step Ahead Radio, one of the best sustainability ESG updates out there. Of course, there is a lot of things that we can talk about today, and inevitably we will have to talk about the latest elections in the US and the consequences of what is going to happen based on the new policy and new government that will take its sort of a place very soon after these elections. What are the implications? What can we expect? James and I will have a bit of a conversation about that, but I did some analysis on what the implications could be. And to start with this is a heading, this was a heading, or is a heading, for this session: 4 years. What is 4 years compared to 40 years to come? You have to bear in mind that the policies that will be changed, or the actions based on these policies, especially in the sectors of oil and gas, which is very much welcoming the new president-elect, as well as the policies that he will implement across US, are very happy about this. There is a big thing that is happening on the market, and I will touch upon that briefly. Many of the hedge funds have been betting against renewable energy and making billions on that. And it goes along with this sort of a belief that regardless of what is going on in the real world in terms of warming planet and warming atmosphere across the world, including the oceans who are creating havoc across the world, there is this belief, especially in some parts of the world, that there is no such thing as climate change, and this is something that is hoax. It has no implication on life on this planet, and definitely no implication on businesses. I think the president-elect has said recently, I think I was tracking down that quote last Friday, just a week before the elections, when he was asked about the rising sea levels. His response was, yes, they are, the sea levels are rising, but who the hell cares? This may be something that is a message to businesses around the world, and especially on the policy level, to policymakers. But in the same time, if you're looking at the underlying numbers and what is going on in the business sector in general, not only in the US but across the world, you can clearly see that things are moving at least in right direction in terms of both investments in renewable energy capacity, transformation from the different kinds of dependencies from fossil fuels. But of course, however, the indications that are being sent out today and yesterday are saying something else. Now, James, I know you're there, and I would like us to have a bit of a conversation about this. And I met yesterday a lot of people who are very concerned, and in many cases also very sad. I also spoke to some of my friends in the US who actually inspired me to use this quote, 4 years instead of 40. I mean, how we need to have a perspective of a long game on this. What's your take? I mean, how do you see this sort of a thing developing going forward?
Good morning, Sasha. It's a very useful conversation to have, and there's so many different dimensions to it. Obviously, I think, well, the first thing I'd say is that compared to the first Trump presidency, I think a lot of people thought that it was a bit of an aberration. It was a bit of a one-off time in history, and there were maybe other moments where voters came out and sort of had a rage against the machine, and it was Brexit or whatever. And I think, winning again and winning so emphatically, it wasn't like a knife edge vote, taking the Senate and probably the House as well, of having that momentum behind his campaign, and that being validated despite everything he said. And a lot of voters I was hearing on the radio and everything saying, I hear what he says, but I'm voting that way, because ABC. So I think we have to kind of look at that as a reality of what the American public wants and believes, and the direction that they want to go in. And so sort of two big thoughts come out of that. One is kind of at the policy level, as you mentioned, and the kind of the difficulty that the whole multilateral process is going to have now. And we know that's going to be extremely difficult to take forward. And it's going to be interesting already just in the COP next week, how other countries are going to respond to that, and how other countries are going to take that forward. As you say, with a 40-year perspective. I mean, I was just reading, we were talking before, there's Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, having an interview this morning with The Guardian, and he said, what was it, the quote he said, the Paris Agreement can survive, but people sometimes can lose important organs or lose legs and survive. And so I think he's got a tough job of, losing such a vital organ. But I think it'll be interesting how emerging markets, Africa responds, how China responds, how big, blocks like that can emerge, sort of Brazil or Indonesia, and take forward maybe more sectoral or more specific areas. We've had this for 30 years, this global conversation where everybody has to be in agreement, and it's really, really difficult.
But that's the question. Isn't his win, in this sort of a context, also one of the examples that globalization as we knew it is not there anymore? It's because multilateralism with participation of the US is extremely important, sort of a segment on this. And if the US, as he was indicating even in the previous period, is not going to take that step or is not going to be involved, it actually signals that we are moving away, also depending on, related to what's going on in Ukraine with the Russia's war in Ukraine and all of that. It's globalization. Is this result of the fact that globalization is not working anymore? We are seeing that both countries are withdrawing their pledges in many cases, and business sectors and leaders in some business sectors are doing too.
And that's, been a very clear trend over the last years. And I think the whole nearshoring and friendshoring trend is going to continue as well, and be reinforced by that, the whole tariff discussion. So I think, you have to change the game. I think that's the kind of the reflection. You can't sort of, the other thing, we talked about the policy level, but the other level is kind of the business level. And as you said, you speak to a lot of people who are very depressed and upset, but it's kind of, there's a certain world within sustainability that's convinced that it's always been right.
Correct.
And you have to face that the argument has not been won. And there's a lot of people who, from Trump down, say, well, who the hell cares? And so it's like, well, how do you change your strategy? How do you change your game to actually win people's?
But I think you're right about that. And I think it's also sort of, it goes back to the fact that many companies have big difficulties to show what the sustainable value prop is they have. In the context of the markets where they operate. We have the reports, we have TCF, we have all of these compliance driven things, but still, on the sort of an outcome side, it's very difficult to see for people around the world what does actually mean on a product and service level. And this is, I guess, something that many companies will be forced to do going forward if they're going to stay in the game. What also fascinated me is the discussion I had yesterday with one of the financial people in the US, as he was basically saying that it's mind-blowing that people are voting this way because of the argument that has been repeated over and over again in the US, which is that the economy is in a bad shape. Unemployment is very low. Stock markets in the US are booming. The US economy is, in general terms, looking very, very good. So the narrative part is also very important. How do we shape that narrative on sustainability going forward? And for me, it's always has been this sort of a thing that you have to defend existence of sustainability approach in the mainstream world, because it does challenge the underlying elements or fundaments of this system. What do you think? Narrative-wise, the way how we shape the narrative, the way how we communicate, the way how we repeat this, is this something that needs to change as well? It's
definitely something, as you said before, that needs to be very much linked to like how you link your social environmental impacts and what you do about it to the transformation of the business, and to products and the services that you deliver to your customers and your clients, right? Because that's where people are going to see and feel the difference and actually vote with their wallet, right? And actually perceive that that's making the difference. I think the risk is that so many people within sustainability, above all, in Europe, are just being overwhelmed by so much regulation and tick boxing that they don't have, the time, the energy, the space to do that. So they really have to sort of change the conversation internally, I think, within the company. I mean, you talk about narrative as if it's something that, the company talks about towards the public. But I think the way it's, pitched and perceived and governed internally within the company is kind of really important. Where does that sustainability team or even just a single person sit? Whose ear do they have, and how do they take their mandate forward and say, well, this is the way we need to go, rather than say, I'll just go back and do my double materiality analysis.
But I also look. I mean, if you make a parallel to politics, I mean, the politicians have lost voters on climate sort of a related action because I think they've failed in many. That goes for Europe as much as in the US. They sort of lost the voters. They lost citizens in the narrative because it's all about the things, moral things that we need to do. We need to do things that are related to, future generation, all of these other things. But of course, I mean, the climate change consequences are hitting us right now. So many of the economic arguments for this transition have been absent, I think, in many cases, in what I've been at least following in the US. But that's I mean, you have a German government that is collapsing due to the fact that Germany is fighting its own sort of economic fight. There are things happening in the Nordic countries, things are happening in the UK. So the question is, how can we win the voters, or on a sort of a corporate level, how do you come closer to your clients, customers, whoever you want, with the narrative that what you're actually trying to achieve? And this is, at least from my experience, it's not really present right now. The clients are not part of the communication or a narrative in many cases, because the reports they are produced for regulators, financial markets, and they are produced for authorities. So it's not really sort of a client, if you take me that way, policy sort of wise, citizens related. So that's the sort of the missing part, I think, in this.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how companies, change and adapt to that. We've been talking the last, 2-3 years a lot about, advocacy on the company's behalf, and what we mean by that is not kind of public policy, sort of trying to influence to their customers, to the voters, and sort of stand up for what it means in practice, rather than sort of just high principles. And very often it's very, as I said before, you really got to break it down, either sectoral level or topic level or specific issues that, maybe there's just one area where, you have leverage, you have, the ability to make a difference. Yeah. And I think, rather than trying to solve all problems all the time, through the UN and have some kind of global accord, is going to be extremely difficult. But, everyone needs to find their own leverage into this and their own position to actually make a difference and take it forward. And that could be actually very, very specific. I think we'll see more of that kind of approach, rather than trying to have, sort of a global or overarching frameworks that kind of resolve everything.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think you can already see that. I mean, Papua New Guinea government has withdrawn from participation, basically claiming that the COP29 in Azerbaijan now, it's just a, charade. And I think there will be many other countries, because given the fact that the US will have a new government with a new policy, there is a big question, what's the point of this at all? But nevertheless, for everybody out there, we will do updates from COP next week, starting next week, and we will do that not on a regular time. So I'll invite on these short updates, 10, 15 minutes, maybe every second day. We'll have some people on the ground in Azerbaijan that we'll talk to, and hopefully we can get the sense out of what is going on there. And the indication so far has been that this COP is all about money, it's all about finance, and it has been about money all the time. But right now, there is a big elephant in the room, and the elephant is how to help developing countries that are severely hit by consequences of climate change to finance their own mitigation and transition. That agreement has not been reached yet, and it has been on the table for many years. There are a lot of disagreements who needs to pay for historical sort of damages, and who will be the ones that will also gain at least some kind of money or some kind of funds to be able to transform the economies going forward. So that will be all for this week. Thank you very much, James, for a very interesting conversation, and hopefully we will touch upon this subject even during the next week and the week after that. I wish you all a great Friday, and there is a light in the tunnel always, and we have to think about the long game. The long game is all what matters. Thank you very much, all of you, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Sasha. Good to speak to you again. Have a good day, everybody.